Hi friends! Yesterday we considered the authority of the Scripture. I mentioned at the end that today we would think about the different lenses through which we understand and interpret the Bible. We're still going to do that, but I'm going to push it to tomorrow because I thought that while we're on the topic of the authority and reliability of Scripture, we should consider the passage that everyone points to, and that is 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. It reads, "All Scripture is inspired by God and is useful for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, so that everyone who belongs to God may be proficient, equipped for every good work." That phrase, inspired by God, is the Greek word theopneustos. And it seems to be a word that Paul made up. He coined it himself. He put two words together, and the first is theo, which means God, and the second is pneustos, which means air or breath or wind. So combined, they mean God breathed. And we don't know exactly what Paul meant by that the Scriptures are God-breathed. It could be that God placed the words in the hearts of the biblical authors. It could be that God placed the big ideas in the hearts and minds of the biblical authors and then allowed them to find the words to express those ideas. It could be that the biblical authors wrote these words and then God breathed on them afterward so that when we hear the words, we hear God speaking through the text. You see, there are a lot of ways to interpret this particular part of the passage. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, wrote about this passage, "The Spirit of God not only once inspired those who wrote it, but continually inspires, supernaturally assists those that read it with earnest prayer." Paul goes on to say in those couple of verses, and really this is his point, that all Scripture is useful for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness, so that everyone who belongs to God may be proficient, equipped for every good work. And that's really his point. He's saying our sacred texts, God breathes on them in some way, and that makes them useful to us when we read them. They help us to understand who God is and what God does and how we relate to God. In other words, the Scriptures are normative for our life and our faith, and they contain everything that we need for righteousness and salvation. The breath of God, who spoke to the different biblical authors in so many creative ways, continues to speak through the words of the Bible. And the power of those words is the power of the Word behind them, the Word made flesh in Jesus, which we'll talk more about on Friday. The real power of the Scripture is God's ability to speak through it in order to transform lives and to change the world. Let me leave you with two quotes from John Wesley to ponder. He said that Scripture should be the constant rule of our tempers, all our words, and all our actions. And that no Scripture can mean that God is not love, or that his mercy is not over all his works. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again tomorrow.